Friends, today we're covering a case that's both heartbreaking and deeply disturbing. It's about a mother whose obsession with online gaming led to the death of her 3-year-old daughter. This is the case of Rebecca Christie. And I have to warn you up front that this story involves the death of a child due to severe neglect. The victim in this case is Brandi. Once I tell you her story, we're going to move on to the case of Michael Patino. He tore his son's intestines. Yes, so brace yourself for that one. I'm just a look at this idiot. He looks like the kind of guy who takes his burgers plain. No lettuce, no onions, no cheese. Just meat and a bun. Taste as fuck. Anyway, back to the case of Rebecca Christie. Rebecca lived what can only be described as a completely inverted life. Now, whilst most parents structure their days around their children's needs, Rebecca had structured her entire existence around the video game World of Warcraft. See, she would wake up around noon, immediately settle in front of a computer, and lose herself in this fantasy world filled with dragons, demons, and heroic adventures until past midnight. Day after day, this was her routine. Now, y'all ever played World of Warcraft, by the way? What a load of bollocks. But I want to be clear, I'm not demonizing people who play online games. Millions of people play video games every day. I'm one of them. Most of these people are very responsible and it's just for some kind of stimulation. But Rebecca's relationship with gaming had crossed the line from hobby to obsession. And tragically, her daughter Brandi was paying the price for this obsession. Now, while Rebecca was busy assuming new identities and staging heroic adventures in her virtual world, she was ignoring the most basic needs of her daughter. And the truly heartbreaking part is that this neglect did not happen overnight. It was a gradual descent that ultimately became fatal when Rebecca's husband, Derek, he was in the army. He was deployed, and he could no longer provide even the minimal care that he had given to Brandi. All three of them lived at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. See, Brandi had started her life as a healthy baby, but by 21 months, something was clearly wrong. She had plummeted to the bottom 5th percentile in weight for her age and was suffering from chronic diarrhea. And when you hear statistics like that, it should set off every alarm bell for any parent. A pediatrician prescribed her Pediasure. This is a nutritional drink designed to help children gain weight, and initially it seemed to work. The diarrhea stopped. Brandi began gaining weight, and by all appearances, she had turned a corner. But the neglect from the parents continued. Neither Rebecca nor her husband Derek, who was also described as a zealous gamer, were up to the task of consistently caring for their daughter. Rebecca would put Brandi to bed each night around 10 p.m. She would then shut the door and then wouldn't retrieve the child until noon the next day. Now, of course, Brandi couldn't open the door herself. Rebecca was effectively locking her away without access to food or water for more than 14 hours every single day. That's crazy. See, my son, he wakes up around 9. As soon as he wakes up, he runs to me, he starts kicking me. Baba, wake up, wake up. My daughter wakes up around 7 a.m. and you can hear her making random sounds. But imagine if I left both of them alone for 15 hours. Just alone. Then you add no food and no water. What the fuck? See, during the investigation, Rebecca let it slip to investigators that Brandi was always hungry and would sometimes try to eat the food that was left out for the family cats. Think about that for a moment. A 3-year-old child was so hungry that she was trying to eat cat food. Now, Rebecca did have a stepdaughter who visited occasionally. She testified that Rebecca often wouldn't feed her or Brandi until 12, and that Brandi's obvious hunger was so apparent that she would share her own food with the little girl. Even a child, the stepdaughter, could see that Brandi was starving, but Rebecca remained focused on her computer screen. Then the situation became critical when Derek faced deployment to the other side of the country, leaving the child's fate completely in Rebecca's hands. Brandi was already in a precarious state, she was badly malnourished, and her body was already struggling. With Derek gone, and Rebecca's attention still completely absorbed by that bollocks game I mentioned, Brandi succumbed to dehydration in just 9 days. That's how long it took for a 3-year-old child to die from being ignored by her mother. The autopsy revealed that no inborn disorder was the blame for Brandi's death. She simply died from being ignored. Medical experts who testified at trial explained that Brandi's desperate condition in the days before her death would have been blindingly clear to anyone paying attention. They described how Brandi would have saw water as a survival instinct. When that failed, she would have become lethargic and on the day before her death, too weak to move. Her diapers wouldn't have needed changing because her body was shutting down. She would have developed sticky saliva, then no saliva at all. Her lips would have cracked, her eyes would have become sunken, and her abdomen would have appeared sunken as well. When first responders arrived and found Brandi, they confirmed that this is exactly what they saw. They testified her lips were cracked and blue, her eyes were glassy, and her eyelids were so dry they couldn't even close. That's a first. I've never heard that before. They said her bones were protruding from her body and her gums had turned black. This is just sickening. All over a video game, you silly cow. Now, because Brandi died on an Air Force base, federal authorities were responsible for the investigation and prosecution. When they examined Rebecca's computer, they found a digital record of her priorities that were damning. The FBI's forensic analysis revealed that Rebecca's online activities typically kept her busy from noon to 3 a.m. with little pause. They discovered that she had been in a chat room just 1 hour before finding Brandi near death, and that she was back online soon afterward. The investigators also found messages Rebecca had sent to other gamers. Now, in these messages, she expressed how annoyed she was about her responsibilities as a mother. She said she wanted out of the house fast. What's weird is, I remember these chat rooms when I used to be on them when I was a lot younger. The Yahoo chat rooms in particular, back in like the mid-2000s. It was addictive, but not at the expense of my family. Now, when Derek was scheduled for deployment, Rebecca announced to her online friends she would be free to fucking party. These were clearly the words of someone who viewed her child as an inconvenience, an obstacle to her preferred lifestyle of gaming and online socializing. So, when the case went to trial, a federal jury found Rebecca guilty of second-degree murder. They sentenced her to 25 years. Rebecca appealed her conviction, raising questions about the computer searches under the Fourth Amendment and the exclusion of witnesses from trial under the Sixth Amendment. She argued that the evidence from her computer should have been suppressed because the searches violated her constitutional rights. Specifically, Rebecca didn't challenge the government's seizure of the computer. They had taken possession of it in May 2006 with Derek's consent, and everyone accepted that he was at least a co-owner of the computer since it was a gift from his father. Instead, Rebecca challenged the 2 searches the government conducted after they had control of the computer, arguing that the warrants for these searches were issued in violation of the Fourth Amendment. It's crazy how she knows this amendment, she knows that amendment, but she couldn't feed her child. To which I say, bog off. How about no amendment, huh? One of the arguments was that there was too much delay between when the computer was seized in May 2006 and when the first warrant was obtained in October 2006. She argued that this 5-month investigative delay was constitutionally impermissible and should have precluded any warrant from being issued. However, the appeals court ultimately upheld her conviction by giving her the middle finger, finding that the district court had handled all the constitutional questions appropriately and carefully. They saw no grounds on which to reverse the judgment in what they called a tragic case. It's worth noting that Derek Wolfe, Rebecca's husband and Brandi's stepfather, also bore responsibility in this case. Court documents show that he signed a statement acknowledging his own neglect of Brandi's health and nutritional needs. He admitted that he reasonably should have known, and that neither he or Rebecca were ensuring that Brandi's medical appointments were being made and kept, and that her special nutritional needs were being met. Derek himself, again, was described as a zealous gamer, suggesting that the household's priorities were fundamentally skewed toward gaming rather than childcare. Derek was away on a 9-day assignment when the girl died. He had expressed reservations about his wife's ability to care for the child. As I mentioned, Rebecca's older daughter had already been placed with Rebecca's parents. Derek told an FBI agent he would regularly come home from work and find his daughter with an empty water glass, as his wife was busy playing on the computer. The house had an overflowing litter box and pervasive smell of cat urine. And as I said, there was so little food, the child was eating the cat's dinner. And when the police went in to search the house, they didn't find any Pediasure, which a year prior had been prescribed to the child for digestive problems and frequent diarrhea. Now, at the sentencing hearing, Rebecca sobbed that she was sorry. She said, "I'll never get to see her grown up. That weighs on my heart. That was my little girl." No, it wasn't. You were too busy twiddling your thumbs on a shit video game. In the court, Rebecca sat slowly, her shoulders hunched and the chains on her wrists shaking. She said, "It was my responsibility to take care of her, and I failed her. I'm sorry." "No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught." Derek, while he provided some minimal care that helped keep Brandi alive while he was present, he clearly wasn't providing the level of attention and care that a vulnerable child was required. When Derek left for deployment, he essentially left a malnourished, medically fragile child in the care of someone who had already demonstrated an inability or unwillingness to provide adequate care. Whether he fully understood the gravity of the decision is unclear, but the consequences were fatal. See, Derek at the time was 35. He was sentenced to a 3-year term of prison for child abuse. He pled guilty to the offense in 2007. He served 1 year of supervised release after he completed his prison sentence. And under the charge of second-degree murder, Rebecca was sentenced to 25 years.
A mother who murdered her daughter by not giving her food and water while she played video games is heading to prison for a long time. 28-year-old Rebecca Christie was sentenced today in Las Cruces to 25 years behind bars for second-degree murder and child abuse. Investigators say it happened while Christie's husband, who was stationed at Holloman Air Force Base, was deployed overseas in 2006. They say she spent 11 days playing World of Warcraft at their home on the base while ignoring her 3-year-old daughter. The child died shortly afterward of dehydration and malnourishment.
Now, I do have another case I'm going to tell you about now. This case is disgusting. This is the case of Michael Patino. Now, in the core of human cruelty, there exist stories that are so disturbing, it just makes you think, what the hell? Forcing us to confront the darkest corners of what some people are capable of. This story of Michael Patino is one such tale. A man who smells of cowardice and brutality and tasteless burgers. In this case, there was the death of an innocent 6-year-old who had just started attending school. His name was Marco Neves. On Sunday evening, October 4th, 2009, little Marco drew his last breath at Hasbro Children's Hospital. This innocent child, who should have been in the playground at school playing with his friends, was pronounced dead at just after 5 o'clock. His tiny body finally succumbing to the savage assault inflicted by a man who was supposed to protect him. The cause of death, as determined by Chief Medical Examiner Thomas Gilson, was peritonitis, a clinical term that basically captures the agony this boy endured. His small body fought desperately against all the pain caused by his mom's boyfriend. You see, Michael, his fists were the murder weapon. I mean, what kind of pathetic excuse for a human being raises his hands against a 6-year-old child to think he was the fastest sperm of millions? Just so you understand, this spineless creature found it necessary to attack this defenseless boy for no reason. There was so much force that Marco's intestines were shredded apart. Yes, that's what this moron did. However, Michael isn't the only one involved in this case. Marco's mother, Trisha, allowed the assaults to take place. She was supposed to protect him, but failed to call anyone for help whenever the boy was feeling pain. So the story begins on October 3rd. Marco began experiencing the first symptoms of injuries, scars, and bruises all over his body. The boy was vomiting. his body beginning to rebel against the internal injuries that Michael inflicted. Michael essentially got his fist and attacked the boy. When he finished, instead of calling paramedics or taking the boy to a doctor, he left the house, then he went to his friend's car shop. He was probably boasting about how he loves to discipline the child. While he's at the car shop, Trisha, Marco's mother, took her ill son to church. This is where concerned clergy immediately noticed that something was wrong with the boy. Their worried observations should have been a call for immediate medical attention. However, Trisha was texting on her phone to Michael about what's happening to the boy. They didn't call each other. They were texting each other. This is what's wrong with the child. Blah, blah, blah. You shut up. You shut up. You did it. Instead of calling the ambulance, they're having an argument on text on how to fix this. She was reporting symptoms such as foamy vomit coming out of the boy and his eyes rolling back in his head, indicating severe distress. The last text message exchange between these two individuals read like a dysfunctional couple. When Trisha texted Michael about Marco crying and being all hurt, Michael responded with this. This is what he said. I punched that little bitch 3 times and that was it. Yes, that's literally how he spelt it. As if his assault on a 6-year-old was something to be proud of. He actually had the nerve to describe in detail how he went to strike him on his back again and again and then on his stomach. And as they're texting, the boy on the floor is deteriorating. His vomit was a dark, foamy substance as his digestive system began to shut down. His precious eyes were rolling back in his head as his body went into shock. His little stomach was rigid and distended with the trauma that was spreading through his tiny frame. Even as Trisha described her son's condition, Michael kept texting back saying, "It's okay, just give him water, or just let him sleep." He wasn't concerned about the child at all, despite having described to Trisha what he did with his fists. He said, rub his stomach with a glass of water or have him gargle on salt. I mean, look at this moron. As I said, tasteless burger. When Trisha finally expressed her panic about having to take Marco to the hospital, her concern wasn't just about the boy's condition. She was worried about explaining all the marks on the child's neck. This detail adds another dimension to a nightmarish situation. Because Michael only mentioned fists to his stomach. But did someone sink their teeth into the boy's neck? Was it Michael? Was it Trisha? We don't know. But the marks were there. Maybe both of them inflicted violence against the child. And his injuries may have been even further than the abdominal injuries he was experiencing. What could make you so angry you'd bite a child? What? So, as they texted back and forth, Michael said, okay fine, I'm coming. But he didn't. He just continued the evening with his friends. He was drinking, getting drunk, and eating plain burgers, leaving the suffering child in the hands of his mother. Trisha then takes the boy back home. And in the early morning hours of October 4th, Marco's condition had deteriorated to the point where she finally called 911. But by then, it was far too late. When the Cranston fire emergency arrived at the apartment, they found a scene that would haunt them forever. A beautiful 6-year-old boy lying unresponsive on the couch, his small body already showing signs of abuse and torture he suffered at the hands of Michael. Private David Brouillard, one of the first responders on the scene, immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. The child had no pulse, wasn't breathing, and appeared to be in the final stages of his life. Paramedics worked frantically to save his life, checking for obstructions in his airway, administering CPR, preparing defibrillation equipment. Then Michael suddenly returns back home. Remember the day before or the night before he said, okay, I'm on my way. Moppet turns up in the early morning hours. He walked in and just stood in the hallway as if he was a chicken laying eggs. In fact, you know what he did? He went in and he tiptoed as he tried to listen in on the extent of the child's condition. The door was open a little bit. He was peeking in. He stood silently in the corner with his hand in his pockets. Trisha, however, was hysterical with grief and panic. While emergency responders worked desperately to save the life of the child Michael had brutalized, Trisha is there sobbing and crying over her child. Michael did not console her once. Now, there are questions about Trisha's involvement in all of this, previous abuse or her letting Michael do this. But in that moment, if Michael had any concerns, his first instinct should have been to console her. He had no tears, no panic, no desperate pleas for the responders to save the boy. Just a quiet, almost bored observation of it all being inconvenient to him. The emergency responders noted Michael's strange behavior, describing him as quiet. And that to me is the worst, because if he cared for the boy, he would have ran inside, "Please Marco, wake up," or something. He would have shown some emotion. The worst kind of emotion is pitiless indifference. And while everyone else in the apartment was focused trying to save Marco, Michael was probably already working on his story, already planning how he would distance himself from the consequences of his actions. The paramedics then raced to Hasbro Children's Hospital. They were administering CPR, using defibrillation equipment, and doing everything in their power to give the boy a fighting chance. And for a short time, at 7:20 a.m., they were able to restore a pulse. Which makes you wonder, if these two Muppets weren't arguing on text the whole time and took the boy to the paramedics, maybe he would have had a better chance. Now, Dr. Linda Snelling, the chief of pediatric critical care at Hasbro Children's Hospital, painted a grim picture of Marco's condition when he arrived. The CT scans revealed the presence of free air in his abdomen, a clinical finding that indicated intestinal perforation, most likely from blunt force trauma. In layman terms, Michael had hit this innocent child so hard that he had torn holes in his intestines. What the fuck? Allowing digestive contents and bacteria to spill into his abdominal cavity and create a massive life-threatening infection. Dr. Snelling's testimony about Marco's final hours is almost too heartbreaking to comprehend. The beautiful little boy was connected to every possible life support system except a heart bypass machine. He needed adrenaline to make his heart beat, a ventilator to breathe for him, and massive amounts of blood products to replace what his body was losing to internal bleeding. The medical team threw everything they had at saving this precious child's life, but they were fighting against injuries that had been festering for nearly 24 hours. Injuries that could have been treated successfully if Michael had sought immediate medical attention, instead of spending the evening drinking with his friends. And imagine the image of little Marco in those final hours. He would have been surrounded by machines and medical equipment, his small body fighting desperately against the infection that was consuming him. The brave little boy fought for his life with everything he had, but in the end, the damage inflicted by Michael's fists was just too much for the little boy. Marco died in the pediatric intensive care unit. Now, back at the apartment, the investigation was beginning to uncover the truth about what happened. Lieutenant Matthew Kite of the Cranston Police Department initially suspected Marco might have ingested some sort of toxic substance, but the discovery of the text messages on their cell phones quickly shifted the focus of the investigation towards the real perpetrator of this crime. The last text messages that Lieutenant Kite discovered were like a digital smoking gun, providing irrefutable evidence of Michael's guilt in Marco's death. These weren't ambiguous communications that could be interpreted in multiple ways. They were explicit confessions to child abuse, complete with details about the location and force of the blows that took the 6-year-old's life. When Michael was brought in for questioning at the police station, he was acting all innocent and playing dumb, telling police he had no idea what happened. He had nothing meaningful to offer the investigators, confirming only the most basic details about his whereabouts and activities. This is typical behavior for someone who knows that they're guilty but lacks the courage to take responsibility for their actions. Instead of showing remorse, instead of expressing concern for Marco's condition, instead of providing any information that could help, Michael retreated into the kind of silence that characterizes cowards when they're finally confronted with the consequences of their actions. But it was the text messages that proved his undoing. See, he never confessed, so at the trial, a lot of evidence was needed. The grand jury indictment for murder came nearly 6 months after Marco's death, and the trial did not take place until April 2015, more than 5 years after the boy had been killed. Michael, age 33, was sentenced by a Providence County Superior Court judge. He was convicted of second-degree murder. State medical examiners testified during the trial that Marco died in 2009 when his intestines were ruptured by a blow to his midsection. Letitia, who is Marco's aunt, spoke in court on behalf of the child's family. She directed her comments to Michael. She said, "Not only did you kill Michael, but you killed a part of each and every one of us with this horrible trial, the torture of hearing the testimony." She went on to say, "The difference is that your loved ones got to see you grow up and are still able to see you. That's something we will never experience with Marco." And as I mentioned, the key evidence in the case included cell phone messages sent by Michael and the child's mother, indicating Michael had punched the boy and used foul language to describe him. Michael's attorney, David A. Cooper, placed the blame on Marco's death. Now, Michael's attorney, David Cooper, he actually placed the blame on Trisha. And then he said his client, Michael, can be rehabilitated. He said, "We have a person who's never had a problem with the law in his life. He's 33 years old, never been arrested for drugs or for breaking into homes or anything along those lines." But the judge, Nettie Vogel, said the defendant had a total disregard for the suffering of the little boy. "He has no remorse for beating him. My jaw remains dropped." While Michael himself did not address the court, Cooper, the lawyer, read a letter. Again, Michael was such a pussy, he couldn't even say the words he wanted to say in court. But what he did say was, "I truly regret using such derogatory language against Marco in those text messages. It was a disagreement Trisha and I got taken out of context." You see that? His statement in court wasn't, "Oh, I'm sorry about what happened to the boy." His statement wasn't, "Oh, may he rest in peace," or whatever. His statement was, "The text messages, I worded them incorrectly." The definition of tasteless. Because he never acknowledged that the physical abuse the child endured. And this is what the judge said. The judge said, "Not once, when you were expressing your apology or your love for Michael, did you acknowledge his pain." And also the Attorney General, Peter Kilmartin, shared similar statements. Peter said he really was not taking responsibility for the beating death of a 6-year-old. Trisha herself screamed at Michael in the hallway after he was led out of the courtroom.
First at 5:30, emotions ran high in court today after a judge handed down a life sentence to a Central Falls man.
33-year-old Michael Patino was convicted of second-degree murder for the death of his then-girlfriend's 6-year-old son, Marco Nieves, back in 2009. Prosecutors say Patino punched the boy so hard he died from his injuries. Eyewitness News reporter Madeline Wright was in the courtroom when the judge made her ruling. She joins us now live from the newsroom with more.
The judge had little sympathy for the defendant, only sympathy for the 6-year-old boy he's accused of killing. Several of the victim's family members cried in court as the judge described the horrific abuse.
I hereby sentence the defendant to life at the adult correctional institutions.
No reaction from 33-year-old Michael Patino on the judge's decision to put him behind bars for life. The Rhode Island Attorney General calls the sentence appropriate.
The defendant, 6 years ago, had a very cold, callous, and brutal day, and today he was held accountable for it.
Back in April, Patino was convicted of murdering Marco Nieves, the 6-year-old son of his then-girlfriend Trisha Oliver. The beating happened at the Riverbend Apartments in Cranston.
It appears that the beating likely occurred after defendant ordered the boy to go outside in the rain and help his mother, Trish Oliver, bring packages into the house. She had returned from shopping. Perhaps the youngster resisted and the defendant beat him.
Beat him so badly it ruptured the boy's intestine.
What kind of man beats a little boy?
The judge's disgust with the defendant was clear as she recounted Marcos's painful death. Several times in court, Marcos's mom broke down in tears. Outside court, the victim's family, overwhelmed with emotion, did not want to comment. Marcos's mother saying simply, "The sentence changes nothing. Her son will never come back." As Patino was let out in handcuffs, he and Marcos's mom got into a tense argument that officers had to break up. Coming up at 6:30 over on Fox Providence, more on Patino's statement to the court and why the judge says her jaw dropped when she heard it. Live in the newsroom, Madeline Wright, Eyewitness News.
But Trisha herself pled guilty to manslaughter for failing to get her 6-year-old son medical attention in time. Remember, she waited till the next day. Trisha was also 33. She admitted to allowing her son to repeatedly vomit and suffer for hours on October 3, 2009, until finally calling an ambulance. Prosecutors accused Trisha of criminal negligence. In fact, her trial, they read out some of her responses in those incriminating text messages. Now, on her phone, she had Michael down as the master. What? And I couldn't find much on what happened in her case, but there was a press release in 2016, so let me read it out to you. It said, the Attorney General announced Trisha was sentenced to 20 years, with 8 years and 9 months to serve, and the balance suspended with probation for her role in the death. She pled guilty to 1 count of manslaughter. The judge concluded Trisha failed to seek medical treatment for her son for more than 15 hours, knowing he was in pain from blows delivered by Michael. It is unconscionable that Trisha watched her son be in severe distress and be more concerned about the whereabouts of her marijuana than seeking medical assistance. Maybe that explains why she took so long. She was thinking, if they come to my house, they'll find all my weed. Finally, the Attorney General Peter went on to say it took until Marco stopped breathing for her to call 911 and then lied about the severity of her son's injuries. It's fair that Trisha failed in her most basic duties as a mother by not providing Marco the aid he needed, leading to the death of this innocent 6-year-old boy. I believe she's now been released. Michael Patino, you sick fuck. I think Trisha is more culpable than the time she served. She didn't kill the boy, but this can't have been the only isolated incident. Michael must have abused the boy over and over again, and Trisha let it happen.
Noontime, a mother's sentencing. A West Warwick woman admitted to her role back in May in the beating death of her little boy. Today, we're expecting Trisha Oliver to be sentenced for that manslaughter charge of her son, Marco Nieves. He was 6 years old. Eyewitness News reporter Steph Machado is at court today and joins us now live with the mobile newsroom.
It's been 7 years since Marco Nieves died at the hands of his mother's boyfriend. This afternoon, we're expecting the little boy's mother to be sentenced for her role in his death. Prosecutors say if only Trisha Oliver had sought medical attention for her 6-year-old son, Marco Nieves, after he was beaten by her boyfriend, the little boy may have survived. The murder happened in Cranston in 2009. Oliver admitted to a manslaughter charge 2 months ago after evidence, including an incriminating text message, showed she waited at least 12 hours to call 911 after her boyfriend, Michael Patino, hit Marco so hard in the stomach it tore his intestine. Patino was convicted of second-degree murder last year and sent to prison for life. Prosecutors showed the jury text messages sent to Oliver where Patino admitted to punching the boy, using derogatory language to say Oliver should let the 6-year-old boy be a man. Oliver eventually called 911 the morning after the beating, once Marco was no longer breathing, but prosecutors say it was too late to save him. The Attorney General's office says Oliver had a duty as Marco's mother to seek medical care for him, and her reckless negligence amounts to manslaughter. Has admitted to those accusations. We are awaiting her sentencing by a judge this afternoon. She could get up to 30 years with 10 to serve in prison. We'll bring you the latest on WPRI.com and starting live at 5. Live in Providence with the mobile newsroom, Steph Machado, Eyewitness News.